Hello. The focus of this video is on our system of government and some basic terms of government as it relates to this course. This course is focused on American government, and so I wanted to introduce some material from Chapter 1. So the focus of Chapter 1 is on different forms of government, and then it gets kind of specifically into our democratic form of government and some other key terms. So I want to talk about those a little bit. First of all, a government is an organization that exists to maintain order in a given area, in a society, in a jurisdiction. It could be a national government that governs the nation. It could be a local government. It could be, in our case in the United States, a state government. But it is the organization in that society that establishes rules for how people operate, and it also exists to protect people. Now, to function, a government must have authority and legitimacy, as discussed in Chapter 1. Authority means it has to have a recognized right to make its decisions, and legitimacy means that it has to come to power in a way that fits with the laws of that society. So there are different types of government. A government by one person, where one person has the authority, would be an autocracy or a dictatorship. An absolute monarchy is also a form of government where one person rules. A lot of the countries that we think of as monarchies are actually not true monarchies in the way we would think of them, but are actually constitutional forms. For example, Great Britain, there is a queen in England who has ruled for decades, many decades now. She is a figurehead. She is not the ruler of the nation, certainly not of the government, but she is the symbolic leader of the nation. So over time, Great Britain has evolved into a constitutional monarchy. But there are countries in the world that do have absolute monarchs. Jordan, for example, has one. Saudi Arabia. Those are countries where the monarch or the royal family actually do rule, and they have the authority, and there's no real check on their power. Another form of government is government by a few people. This is where you have a group that's in charge. Certainly oligarchies, where the wealthiest leaders of industries rule, as certain countries have that. We also think of theocracy, a rule by religious leaders. Iran is an example of that. And then you have democratic forms of government, which are government by many. In Greek, demos means the people, and kratos means to rule. So literally, a democracy is where the people rule. Now, there are two types of democracy. There is democracy by representatives, and then there is direct democracy. In a democracy where you have where it's direct, where it's the people making the decisions themselves, the idea is that the laws are passed by the people. They don't delegate it to a representative body. They actually make the decisions themselves. That is not a practical way to govern most countries, or certainly any country would be almost impossible to govern that way. In the United States, at the federal level, at the national level, we have no examples of direct democracy because our Constitution provides only for representative democracy. At the state level, and certainly in local communities, you do have some examples of direct democracy. For example, in the state of Michigan, voters have the opportunity every 2 years to vote on certain amendments to the Michigan Constitution, and also to decide laws. An example is a few years ago, voters approved the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes in our state, and that was done through a citizen initiative. So we do have that ability. That would be direct democracy. But direct democracy is very uncommon because it's difficult for citizens to really know all the issues they would have to vote on. And so you only have some limited examples of direct democracy. The most common form of a democratic government would be representative, and that's what we have in the United States. The Constitution spells out that we have three branches of government, and in particular, the legislative and executive branches are led by individuals who are elected by us. So, for example, we elect our members of the House of Representatives, we elect our senators, we elect the president and the vice president, and then their job is to look out for the public interest of the voters, of the people, really, not just the voters. Representative democracy is really a good form of government generally if the representatives are looking out for the public good, but certainly a problem that can develop is that oftentimes elected representatives look out for their own interests. And the framers of our Constitution in this country were very aware of that problem and did some things that we'll discuss in Chapter 2 to try to mitigate against self-interest or interest groups or factions. So a representative democracy is one where the elected representatives are looking out for the public good. Now, in Latin, there are two words, res and publica. Res means good, publica means public. So a representative democracy is res publica, or a republic. So oftentimes you'll hear of the United States being referred to as a democratic republic. Democratic meaning that we elect people to serve in office, and a republic meaning that we have representatives who make those decisions. Another distinguishing characteristic of a republic is there is no monarch in charge. So Great Britain, which is a democratic country, which has elected leaders, which has a constitutional system, is not a republic because they do still have a monarch, even though she doesn't have any political power. Another thing to understand about democracy is that while it's supposed to be based on the public, on people, certainly problems can develop. In Chapter 1, the authors talk about elitism and majoritarianism and other theories of American democracy. Elitism is the idea that the interests that have the most influence are not the general public, but elites, wealthy individuals or wealthy companies oftentimes dominate the political debates. Majoritarianism is an idea that actually the majority rules, and certainly that is the case on a number of things, where if a majority wants something, it will happen, keeping in mind, of course, that there are minority rights, and we have to be always careful about that. And then finally, there's a theory, a democratic theory in the United States known as pluralism. That's the belief that we benefit as citizens if we have multiple groups of people representing us. Those are known as interest groups, which we'll be discussing in Chapter 7 later in the semester. So those are some theories about how American democracy works. A key characteristic of any democracy is suffrage. Suffrage is the right to vote. Universal suffrage means that everyone in that country has the right to vote. The United States, throughout most of our history, did not have universal suffrage. For most of our history, African Americans could not vote. For a large chunk of American history, women had no right to vote. Those problems have been corrected. Women got the right to vote through the 19th Amendment in 1920, and then with both the 15th Amendment and then later on the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the rights of African American people and others to vote has been protected under federal law. But it took a long time to get to that point. And even now, there are still issues with disenfranchisement of people based on race or other factors. So that'll be discussed in Chapter 8. So universal suffrage, though, is a very important characteristic of a democratic republic or a democracy, because the people have to have a right to vote. They have to have a right to make decisions and not just be forced to choose only one individual or one party. And so those are ongoing issues that we face in our country, and we'll discuss that in Chapter 8. So those are just a few of the key terms from the first chapter. Politics is also discussed. Politics is the process by which decisions are made in a political society, in a country, and certainly in any political situation, there has to be compromise, because not everybody is going to get what they want. And conflict has to be resolved in some way. One final thing I want to mention from Chapter 1 is the idea of ideology. Ideology is a person's set of beliefs about the role of government. So, for example, the two most common ideologies in this country are liberalism and conservatism, and it refers to the ways that people think the government should work in terms of the economy and in terms of personal matters. So, for example, a liberal is someone who would want the government to try to promote fairness in the economy, but would be opposed to the government getting overly involved in people's personal lives. So, for example, a liberal would be pro-choice on the issue of abortion, and a liberal would want to spend more on say, health care or social welfare programs. A conservative is essentially the opposite of that. So a conservative believes that the government should promote certain moral values, I guess. So, for example, they would be against abortion being legal, believing that it's a violation of religion, and it's framing the abortion debate in religious terms. They would also be against same-sex marriage, which is legal in the United States. But a conservative would be more in favor of the government staying out of the economy and letting the free market take care of problems that develop. And so those are just, so essentially Democrats represent the liberal side and Republicans the conservative side. But it's not quite as clear cut as that, because you can't have Democrats who are more moderate or even conservative and Republicans who are more on the moderate side. But certainly ideology is important for a lot of people. So please make sure you have read Chapter 1. If you have any questions, let me know. And I will have another video on the next topic next week. Take care.